Faculty Spotlights focus on a technique an instructor uses to increase student engagement in a course or focus on a specific learning objective. Professor Artemis Leontis added a course blog to her freshman writing seminar to offer students an opportunity to compose in multiple forms of media. We interviewed her about her experience. So welcome, Professor Leontis.
Thank you. Thank you for arranging this discussion and beginning it a little bit ahead of time so we can get going and thinking about teaching writing at the university.
Well, so let's start with that. What was your motivation for creating this course?
So I can answer that in three levels. One is that I teach modern Greek, and Greece has been in an austerity mode for the last 10 years, except in graffiti, which has been booming. And so it's so ubiquitous, and actually it's been developing and quite a remarkable phenomenon. And so I was observing it and thinking, what is very contemporary that I can teach a class about. So that's the one. The other thing is that graffiti in Greece is a very ancient form, and there have been uses of it, different kinds of uses of it. And so I knew that I could sort of connect contemporary practices with older practices and think about graffiti as something with a history. So we have, sort of a contemporary phenomenon, but, people have been writing on walls, and there's official writing and there's unofficial writing, and sometimes you can't tell the difference between them. So that it seemed like something, interesting. But another motivation for me, this was a freshman seminar, and freshman seminars are places where we can explore topics with students. And I felt like my literacy on this huge world phenomenon, which is graffiti and street art, was very low, and I wanted to become more literate. And I thought, as the students become more literate, I'll try to be one step ahead of them, but that this is something that I can't ignore. So those were sort of the three motivations. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the subject really lent itself also to writing. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it seemed to me like a perfect subject for teaching, using to teach writing.
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about the learning objectives for the course, or your intentions for what students would come out of this with.
So one set of objectives had to do with the writing, teaching the writing skills. Mm-hmm. And I thought of this as a course that was teaching academic writing, and particularly the really challenging thing of connecting what it is that you are studying with what other people say. So, kind of getting a sense of scholarship at different levels, some of it more popular, and then, sort of following your path of inquiry and making clear what that is, developing an argument, and then writing about a topic. So the other set of goals really had to do with learning about graffiti, observing graffiti, understanding its rules, being able to see it in context, and then thinking about it also as an internet phenomenon. And so those are the two sort of sets of goals that the class had.
So the assignments in this course follow a progression, with the culmination of the assignment to do a blog post. Describe sort of your process for structuring those assignments, the scaffolding there, and the critical skills you really felt that they needed to do the assignment, and how all those assignments sort of got them to the point where they really could create a good blog post.
There were 4 writing assignments, and the first was a very short one, which was called Making a Name. And it's based on signature graffiti. Signature graffiti is graffiti that is the signing of a name, and for the most part, signatures are pseudonyms. And so this is a really basic to graffiti of the last, 40 years. So they learned about it, and then I asked them to develop their own signature and then circulate it, and then write about it. So write about their choice, write about their strategy for circulating it, and put all of that in an essay with a beginning, middle, and an end. Very short essay. So on my part, what I was getting was a diagnostic. How good is their writing on different levels? Can they, sentence level, the thought level, their citations, are they paying attention to their path of inquiry, and are they marking that? Do they understand the topic? Have they really gotten into this topic? And then are they able to put their ideas into an essay form? And so I could really get a sense of where they were as writers. And as far as the subject of graffiti, this was really where, sort of the core of this class, which is that graffiti is writing. It's writing and it's performance, and it is developing a relationship with audience. So they had to think about themselves as a projection of themselves, right? Not just as themselves, but as someone they want to be, and think about audience and how to reach it, and also understand what it means to write under a name. So that was the first assignment. And the second assignment was for them to open up beyond themselves and to start looking around in their actual environment. And so it was called Graffiti in the Neighborhood, and I asked them to go out and document graffiti in a small area, some area of choice. And I said it should be in Ann Arbor, or it could be in their hometown, but it could not be something that they found on the internet. They actually had to go there and document it themselves. And for some, that was a really hard thing to do. They wanted to take a shortcut. But the point of that was to see the site specificity of graffiti, and also to see the different kinds of graffiti and start to be able to categorize it. So in that case, they had to also produce an annotated bibliography of graffiti sources that would help them be able to describe techniques, styles, in order to place the graffiti that they were, and rules, and the rules of graffiti. That a really big thing for me is that graffiti is not chaotic. It's actually very rule bound. And so what kinds of rules do you see? If someone is writing over someone else, is that a phenomenon that we should observe? And this actually happened during the time when it was right before the election, and so several people wrote about the Diag as a place where there was a lot of graffiti. It's chalk graffiti, and there was a lot of overwriting that was going on, and so there were some really fun essays that came out of that, and good essays, and they started to think, I think, they anticipated the next topic, which was art crimes. Graffiti is a really complex phenomenon. Its status is connected with rules that have to do with trespassing, with vandalism, but also interesting things about intellectual property and copyright. It's incredibly complicated, and it wasn't always criminalized, and it's not criminalized everywhere. And so we had to think about our reactions to it. How would we feel if graffiti was put on our property? So that, sort of the personal reaction on the other side, but also what does it mean that you criminalize some uses of public space, but not others? So why is it that people can put billboards up, can put flyers up? So we also included in this section a set of debates on one particular case, a really interesting Banksy piece that had been put up for political reasons and then was cut out and sold. And there was, sort of a lot of discussion about the status of that as a piece of art that was then, in the art world where no one had received permission to remove it. So in that case, they wrote a paper that was an argument-based paper, but they needed to be able to back it up with thinking about best practices, where best practices are in conflict. And then at that point, I felt that they were in a position to select works of graffiti that they could project as their own, curate as ones that express something for them, give a kind of unity to that as a topic, right, which could have been anywhere. I found them all in one place, or these are all examples of signature graffiti, or all of these are controversial pieces, or something. One student wrote about the economics of graffiti. And I wanted to say that in the middle of all of this, we actually had a graffiti artist who came and visited from Athens. I was working with the Humanities Institute on this, and we brought two artists. One is a street artist, a graffiti artist. The other is an artist who works in both galleries in the street. And so we talked to them. We actually did a project, so they started to see, what are the materials of it, how hard it is to do it, what does it mean to paint on a brick wall. Of course, we got permissions for all of this. I just wanted you to know that. So one student wrote about the economics of it, like how much does it cost to produce And where does that money come from? I know that's a long answer, but
No,
that was really the
that's
thinking about how I sequenced them.
The continuum.
Yeah.
Perfect. So you made several decisions about the blog, the aesthetics, the structure. You decided to use tags. And I know this was your first experience, I think, with using blogging. Can you talk a little bit about that process of, initiating the creation of the blog and sort of the decisions that you made along the way?
One of the conditions was that I wanted the students to be involved. And so they were involved in the sense that they said, like, they made choices like, they wanted to have tags, and I said, well, let's produce them. I want you to think about what are the keywords that are going to come up. We needed to have somehow a capacity to put captions on, because we wanted to do a better job of presenting work than a lot of these pieces, which end up without any kind of captions. There's no indication of where they're from. There's no indication of who took a picture. And actually, we worked a bit on that. We went to the Kelsey Museum and looked at captions there. But then, there were also compromises. I mean, if I could have built my own blog and I knew enough and I had spent enough time on it, I would have done other kinds of things, or I didn't really know, how limited I would be. So would we use 2 columns, 3 columns? Where would the pictures go? There wasn't a lot of control of where those pictures would go on this particular blog. And those were things that we learned along the way. And then we made choices together about the background colors and about what would go on the front page. So a lot of it was kind of a group idea. And then I wrote the homepage text in order to give as much a comprehensive a view that could link to different things on the blog.
In terms of then using WordPress, did you have, I believe, Bluecore provided support to your students? Did they visit class?
We had Anthony Kennedy.
Yeah, Anthony
He
came.
came and he visited the class.
Okay.
He explained
Okay.
what our choices would be. They picked everything up just like that. I was about 10 steps behind them. It was much easier for them to really understand how this was going to be set up. So yes, he talked to them, he talked them through it, and we made a few choices with him, but I think I had also met with him before that, and so some of the choices were already conveyed. And I can't remember the sequencing of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
But it
that
was
was-
fantastic to work with him.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
And
yes.
and and under pressure, because I should have given myself more time to prepare this.
Sure.
But there was a lot to prepare for the class. So next time.
Yeah.
And I think also I think it's really important to try to figure out how to reuse some of these so that you don't have to build the structure all over again. When I have a class, like I did this with another class, and I want that WordPress to be used again, and then you can sort of build from one class to the next. Because it's a lot of work to set it up, but also students can benefit from reading what other people have read before.
Yeah. But that's helpful to know that they felt comfortable, that there wasn't a huge learning curve on their part.
It was a bigger learning curve for me than it was for them.
Okay, got it. So talk a little bit about your assessment strategy for this project. How did you explain the criteria to students that they'd be graded by, and how did you come to those criteria?
Going back to the objectives always, so part of what I wanted them to do was to be learning about a field, and the other part of it was learning academic writing, so the whole matter of how you research a project, how you develop it, how you keep track of where you've learned things. And so, I think really those things were conveyed in class throughout, and the class was an integrated attempt at teaching both graffiti and writing at the same time. And so I think that by the, I would post the assignment. The assignment would say, this is what you have to do, and these are the things you need to think about. These are the things you need to accomplish. And so they knew that ahead of time. And then I would, incorporate a peer review where they're looking for those things. And then I would, my comments would address what I was asking for. So I mean, I think that's
perfect.
pretty standard.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
I think that's the good writing, teaching writing strategy, that you are breaking it down that way and always telling them ahead of time what you're looking for, and then commenting on that. And then sometimes I would introduce the next thing, like if you want to push your writing to the next level, think about this, and then that would be the next thing that I would introduce. So there's always that idea of scaffolding was there. And then in the grading, as I said, I would address exactly those points that, but I use the split strategy. So I always had students give me printed copies, and I also had them submit online. And also I had their drafts online, so I could refer to those and look back at them. On the paper version, I would comment, I would include editorial kinds of comments, and it was more of the editor's voice. Like, you know, your punctuation here is wrong, or, you know, think about the transition here, or, you know, it's wrong word. So a lot of it was a little bit slightly more negative in the sense of, you know, this writing could be better if you did this, or where's the antecedent of this pronoun. I mean, just sometimes really basic things and sometimes more complex things, but it was the details of writing. And then on the Canvas version, which I did find the grading function on Canvas to be a very lovely feature. So I would comment on larger scale matters, like, you know, this is a topic you haven't introduced before, or the flow of the argument doesn't work here, but also positive things. You know, this is a really nice move from here to there, and I really like the flow of it. And then in my comments there, I would be very succinct and say, you know, these are the things you did well, these are the things you need to work on, here are your goals, and then try to remember those the next time that I graded.
Any other comments about Canvas in general?
Well, it was the first time, that was the very first time I was using Canvas. It was a very steep learning curve for me. Again, it was a different kind of technology. I, you know, had mastered C tools. It was good that it was a new class. It wasn't a class that I had, you know, there was another class I was teaching which I imported from C tools. So here I was inventing a class for the first time. And there were some things about it that were not intuitive for me. I think I probably spent 2 hours trying to figure out how to create a folder. And then, you know, and then once I knew it, it was the simplest thing in the world. But I think, you know, creating a class and thinking about Canvas at the same time, that allowed this to be a much more integrated process, but very time consuming, very, very time consuming. And also because Canvas has all these capabilities, you know, where you can really create a very integrated class. So when you have sort of this sense that, well, yes, this connects to this, you know, then I'm like linking here and there, and it on the one hand, it made it easier for the students. On the other hand, it took a lot of my time. And sometimes I wonder about that when we, you know, we make things, you know, so accessible to the students. It's there. All you have to do is click on the link. You know, there's, and the front loading of the work is you know, and it feels very natural to them, and they sort of expect it. So I had very mixed feelings about it. I mean, this year it's a lot easier because I already know, but I had mixed feelings about it. I had mixed feelings about the transition to it, and how suddenly it happened, and how there hadn't been a lot of input from faculty in that. So mixed feelings about it, but it worked well for this particular class. I think the amount of linking that you can do was really very good for this class. And as I said, the grading is, I think, nice. It's a really nice feature.
A time saver?
I think it's a time saver. I think you can. I think so.
Can you describe the typical student that was in the course?
Probably every single student took the class because they said, oh, I thought it might be fun to take a class on graffiti. Some of them had no sense of knowledge of it at all. And some had very negative sense of it, which I welcomed. You know, I think that's a really important dimension of graffiti. And then there were a couple of students who just were passionate about street art, graffiti. They knew they knew categories. One of them had been to Barcelona, and she was very fascinated with it, and she was really sort of stood out in her level of interest. And but there were others who were quite engaged with the subject. So I think the generalization I would draw is that the freshman writing seminars do attract students who are looking for a topic that connects with something they're interested in. Well,
thank you very much for giving us a little window into the whole process of creating this course. I was fascinated.
Thank you
and
for
just
your
really
interest and
enjoyed.
for the feedback. You know, I mean, I had spent a lot of time on the class and I really enjoyed teaching
Yeah.
it, but it was nice to get feedback from someone who is involved in, you know, thinking about education and pedagogy and how we do this. I also have to say that I spent time talking to people at Sweetland, and got really, you know, really great direction in preparing the class. Really good tips. Naomi, and I'm blanking out on her last name.
Silver.
She was just really great, and she showed me examples of classes that had used different digital forms, and so that was where and of the kinds of assignments that so how important it is to think about integrating the assignment and the form. And I think also really made me think about not just genre but medium as something that is part of the whole writing experience. What is the medium you choose to write about? So if you're going to be writing a blog, recognize what kinds of things people do on blogs that they don't do, let's say, in another medium, and what level of formality you have more range of choice, what level of formality you'll use. So that was very good prep for me.
Great to hear. Thank you once again.
Thank you.